Okay, so you're arguing that obese people should have to pay more for insurance.
Yeah, but I do think it depends on like why they're obese, right? Because I think there's a difference between people's choices leading them to being obese and someone being obese due to like genetics or like medication.
But we don't really have a way to differentiate that, though, do we?
Well,
Like
doctors have like, sorry, doctors have patient history, right? And they can like look back. That's why we have things like records.
I still think it can be difficult, though, to determine if somebody's obese out of their own like behavior or if there's genetic factors. And there's also environmental factors, like poor people have less access to healthier foods that help them not become obese. Like people in food deserts who only have access to like fast food, for example, are probably more likely to become obese, right?
I feel like that's more a problem with like our food policies than our like insurance policies, right?
It is,
and also
but we're talking about obesity, and our food policies are going to affect our obesity rates, right?
Sure, but it's also a big thing with people's choices. Like, I definitely think, because we already have things where we reward people. Like, smokers have lower insurance rates, and obesity has like a lot of health problems that come along with it, just like smoking. Right. So it's kind of like a risk factor, right? And insurance is based off of those risk factors.
Yeah, but a lot of people, like people don't choose to be obese in the same way that a person might like choose to smoke, right? Like it has multiple factors. Like people don't want to be obese for the most part, right? Like obesity itself is a health condition, and you're basically punishing people who are suffering with this health condition.
But a lot of times the root of that health condition is poor choices, and it could possibly incentivize people to make healthier choices if they know they have to pay more if they don't.
I think there's already a pretty big incentive to not be obese with like just the health risks in general. And I think part of it is like this could be like a form of fat discrimination because you're kind of like forcing overweight people to pay more. And it's not always their fault.
Well, some people have different motivators, right? Like some people are motivated by money, so the health risks may not matter to them. And also, it's not the fault of an insurance company if you're obese. Like,
yeah, it's not.
And why a lot of our taxes go towards health insurance. So, like, why should a lot of people have to pay for other people's poor choices?
I mean, it's kind of already like that, isn't it? Like,
so we shouldn't add something else along with it. Like,
I mean, obesity, like I said, though, like you're basically setting it up in a way where people don't really have a lot of people don't have a way to not be obese, right? Because like lots of people with unhealthy habits, like smoking, for example, people can become addicted to cigarettes, sure, but in the end, it's like a choice. You choose to smoke. But with obesity, you could say there are factors that might lead to somebody being obese, but a lot of times people don't have the option to not be obese.
But they have the option to like prevent it, and they know like it's a bad thing to do.
Right,
and also,
I don't think preventing it is a realistic option for everybody. Like there's some people who don't have a realistic way to avoid becoming obese due to genetic factors, the environment that they're in, the lack of money that they have to make healthier decisions. And I just feel like making obese people pay more for insurance when they're probably already poor which is a reason why they're obese in the first place, it just seems counterproductive. Like, if we want to help obese people lose weight, there are other incentives that we can put in place, like making healthier foods less expensive.
I think that's I do agree with you. Like, we should have incentives like that and like programs for people, like exercise programs, and encouraging them to do that. But I still think like raising those insurance costs could be a good idea. Because like because obesity related like sicknesses make up like 21% of our medical spending.
Yeah, I mean, obesity is definitely a big health issue. No one's denying that. But like, just making people pay more for something that's so like fundamental, like the size of themselves, right? It just seems kind of discriminatory.
But a lot of times that size wasn't their original size. It's like a creation of their decisions. So it's kind of like something really bad that they did.
Right, but maybe we could, charge people more based on their decisions and not based on being obese, because obesity isn't necessarily the result of poor decisions in every case.
But like a lot of times it is.
Yeah, a lot of times, but not all the time. So like, I don't think that like all obese people should have to pay more when they might have some sort of, genetic problem that causes them to become obese.
Right.
And I also
so like really... that's why I wanted to like define that it should be more for people whose obesity is a result of like their decisions.
Right. And we could like discuss that, but like the proposition is obese people should pay more, not people whose choices led them to become obese should pay more.
Like
if you want to like make it so that people who make decisions where their health is at risk should be charged more, that's more reasonable, I think, than just making it obese people. Because we can agree that not every obese person is obese because of poor choices, right?
But it's a huge amount. And also, like, I think, like, there are reasons for people being obese that are shitty, like you said, environmental or trauma. But you have a responsibility to deal with the things that happen to you. It's not anyone else's responsibility to take care of you. Like, why should your folly be someone else's, like, money?
Because it's not always their folly. Like, if you're living in, like, if you're very poor and you're living in a food desert and you become obese because of your lack of options and income, to throw more issues on top of that, like they have to pay more on top of that, it's just going to exacerbate the problem. It's not really going to fix anything.
I mean, that's why I agree with you on adding other incentives, like more making food like less expensive, and like getting rid of like meat subsidies would be another one, because meat's like extremely cheap because of subsidies. But
yeah, but we have all of that stuff, right? So taking all of those factors into account, should we charge people more for being obese? I think we shouldn't.
I don't know, because like thinking of like the economic fallout, like this link like explains a lot of the like consequences obesity has for like money wise.
Yeah.
So,
but I feel like we can all chip in terms of healthcare. Like I prefer a universal healthcare system. And I think that it would just be more feasible if it was in a universalized healthcare system, because obese people are probably more likely to be poor, right? Like, because people who are richer can afford better food, better healthcare, and that prevents them from becoming obese. So I feel like unless people have
potentially.
access to these things that they need to help them prevent becoming obese, we're just throwing more weight on their shoulders.
But we're
in terms of
throwing
the
weight on
cost.
other people's shoulders when, like, they have to pay insurance for these people whose health was most likely a result of their own decisions. Like, there's a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck and then they have to worry about taxes. So, like, why should those people have to pay more? And also, like, under universal health care, there are no, like, private insurance companies. So I think you're trying to, like, get away from the private market. And I think this conversation should be more focused on the system we have, or a system with private insurance companies, because that's kind of a red herring.
It depends, right? Because are we arguing like in the United States context, or the context of like, a universalized healthcare system? If we're
The
arguing in the
US context.
okay, sure. If you want to argue in the U.S.
Because
context,
we're talking insurance companies, because under like a universal healthcare system, there's no like private insurance.
Are we assuming universal? I mean
No.
private. Because hold on.
Because the prop is
Okay. For insurance, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Okay, sure. Even if that's the case, though, that we're arguing in like a private healthcare system context, I still think that it's just counterproductive and immoral to make people who are already struggling with health issues and stuff to pay more when the structure is set up in such a way where it's more likely for them to be unhealthy in the first place. Like, maybe if it was set up where access to healthy foods was like available for everybody, then we could make like a case. But like, even then, there's like genetic factors that influence obesity.
Like, it is available in many places, and
Sure, yeah, but not everywhere.
Like, a lot of it is environmental, and like I said, it's not it's not another person's responsibility to deal with that. And
but it is, though, because if they're gonna make you pay more because you're obese, isn't there some sort of like obligation that you at least have the option to not be obese? Like, doesn't that assume? But not everybody does. Because
like, most of the time you do.
Not everybody's in an economically advantaged position where they can afford healthy food. Like,
then I think we should like make another policy to make healthy food more affordable. Like, you can have both, right?
yeah, but it's not the case. Like, if we're arguing like you said, we're arguing in the US context. So it's not the case that that is available to most people in this context. So to argue that they should have to pay more for being obese doesn't seem fair to the people whose obesity wasn't a result of actually free choices.
Well, it's also not fair to make other people pay taxes for, like, like, some people, sure, their obesity isn't their fault, but I think for the most part, or I think like at the very least, like we could have a system that tries to determine why people are obese and looks at their history, right? So we could just make it so that if it's someone's own fault, they should
but
have
is
to
that
pay
really
more.
like a feasible thing to do? Because then we're trying to like
How?
separate. Because it seems like it would be a difficult thing to do, right? To separate the reasons why somebody became obese. Like, it would be hard to determine whether or not it was the result of economic factors that were unavoidable for them, like being locked in a food desert, whether or not they have a genetic component, versus somebody who has none of those barriers and just chooses to eat unhealthily.
Then I think we should err on like the safe side, because there's people who are paying taxes towards some people whose health is like mostly their own fault, and the people paying taxes don't deserve to like especially the people who are poor.
On the safe side is in this case, because I think if we're erring on the safe side, we should err on the side of it not being their fault, right? Because you're like assigning blame to people when we're not actually sure that they're blameworthy. So erring on the safe side would be assuming that they're not blameworthy.
But there's other victims here too. Like there's the taxpayers and there's like other people who are sick. And if our insurance is going towards some people whose health is their own fault, like what about the people like where it isn't?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with your framing on this, because people pay for taxes a lot of times when they don't feel like they should have to. Like, for example, if you don't have any kids, you might not want to pay for public schools. That doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility to pay those taxes. Right? Like they could say, oh, you had a kid, it's your responsibility to educate your kid. I don't feel like I should have to pay taxes because I chose to not have any kids. So why should I have to pay
But I think the consequences of not paying taxes for schools is bigger. So like there's more of a reason to make people pay. And people already pay for health insurance, and we already do like incentivize the health factors thing. Like there's some health factors where you do have to pay more already.
Yeah, but you agree that when it comes to important things, a lot of times people have to pay taxes when they might not necessarily think it's fair, right? Like for public schools, for example, if they don't have any kids.
I think it depends on the situation, but I think it's good for schools.
It is good for schools, and obese people not having to pay more would be good for them, right? But like, do you agree that occurs? Like people have to pay taxes for some things that they don't necessarily think is fair.
I agree it happens. Like I don't.
Do you agree that it should happen? Like, do you agree that
it depends on the case?
What?
It depends on like the situation.
So what's the difference between like people who don't have any kids and don't want to pay for public schools and somebody who isn't obese and doesn't want to pay for somebody who is obese?
Because like you're not. Because school is like specifically for a kid who's like not an adult yet and need help with like educating themselves and things like that.
Right. So it's the circumstances that they find themselves in, like being young, not having access to education without public schools.
Right.
But yeah, but obese people also find themselves in a situation that they don't necessarily want to be in. Like, I doubt that most obese people want to be obese.
I mean, no, they don't want to, but they did want to make the choices that they made that led to that. Like, a lot of smokers don't want to have like lung cancer, but they still like made decisions
Right,
that
but the
increase
difference
the
is that it's
risk.
not always a real decision. Like if you're in a food desert and the only access you have is unhealthy foods, then there's no realistic decision to be made. Like blaming those people for eating fast food in that case, it's like eat unhealthy or don't eat. And people need to eat to survive, so is it
Like, I think we
really a
can.
choice in that case?
I mean, exercise is a huge factor as well. Like, that's not the only like factor in being obese.
Exercise is a factor, but it's like diet is way more of a factor. Because if all you have access to is unhealthy foods, you can exercise and that might help a little bit, but the chances of you becoming obese are much greater. And again,
I agree, but that's why
there are genetic factors that lead to obesity as well.
And
like there's just lots of different causes for someone to become obese. And I don't think it's fair to just lump every obese person into the it's your fault camp. Like that seems kind of,
like I would think the majority is its fault. And this is kind of like a policy-wise thing. And when we make policies, it's hard to like look at every little person and every little circumstance here and there. But we could have like two policies, like making them pay more, but also making food that's healthy less expensive.
Yeah, but that's why I think it would be a discriminatory policy, because if it's not differentiating between people who are just unfortunate enough to be in situations where they're more likely to become obese and somebody who that's not the case for.
Right. But
like if you can't make that differentiation, then I don't feel like it's a moral policy.
I think we like could with like records and stuff like that, but if like you can't, like there's a big risk to like not making them pay more because there's already a ton of money going toward obesity related illnesses and a lot of like
Yeah, so I think the issue with that is we should focus to reduce those costs, like focus on helping obese people lose weight. But I don't think our focus should be on making them pay more.
Like you mentioned genetic factors. Like what else do you have to say that obesity isn't someone's fault?
I told you environmental factors as well. If you're in an environment like a food desert and you become obese as a result of not having access to healthy food, I don't know how you could say that it's their fault.
Like we can institute policies that like get rid of food deserts and make them have healthier food. But I think there's just way more factors that lead to it being the obese person's fault.
I don't really know about that. Like I think
those
a lot of
people
cases
could always like move out of the food desert, or they could like.
Well, no,
like there's
I think
other
they
options.
would if they could, but part of not being wealthy enough to afford healthy food is not being wealthy enough to relocate to an area where there is healthy food. And even if they could do that, then being able to afford the food on a daily basis.
I just think, like, yeah, food deserts exist and they're like shitty, but there's tons of obese people living where there aren't food deserts and they're making choices that are bad when they have options for healthy food. And they can, like, they have things they can do, but they're not doing them. And I just think that makes up a bigger proportion than the people where it isn't their fault. I think, like...
I mean, do we know that, though? Like, do we
I think
actually
it's kind of
know the
like
amount of people who are obese as a result
common
of just...
knowledge, right?
Well, I think it's
Like,
assumed, right? But do we know how many people have genetic factors that make them more prone to becoming obese?
I don't think so, but I think genetic factors are only like a small part of it, and food deserts are only a small part of it.
But we don't really
Like,
know
I
that,
think
though, right? Like, out of the percentage of people who are obese, we don't really know what percent are predisposed to becoming obese and what percent it's a result of poor choices. So, not knowing that, we should have, shouldn't we err on the side of caution?
I don't know because like
Hmm?
like I don't know because I think if you're making an insurance policy, like we already do make certain people pay more for poor choices, and we're speaking about people who are like obese, not just overweight. Like just kind of like a difference, right? Kind of like it's understandable if someone's overweight, but if someone's like overweight to the point of being obese, like that's where a lot of like choices come in.
Well, there's more issues than that, just that, because how do you determine, like, how somebody became obese? Like, we don't know if it's genetic factors, we don't know if it's a result of their choices. But, like, where does it stop if we start, like, making people pay more for things that we deem are unhealthy? Like, would you say that people who go to McDonald's like twice a week should have to pay more to somebody compared to somebody who doesn't?
Would depend on their weight because we're talking about one risk factor, right? Like smoking.
Yeah.
Like a lot of smokers have to pay more for health insurance because it's a risk factor.
But I'm saying, like, yeah, but I'm saying, like, where does it stop when we're like determining somebody's choices? Like, let's say there's an obese person who eats fast food once a week. How do we know that they're obese? Like, we might say, oh, it's their fault. They're eating fast food once a week. But what about every other person who eats fast food once a week who isn't obese? Like, how do we differentiate their choices and their obesity? How do we know
Hey,
what
fast
caused?
food can be expensive. Like they should be able to afford better food if they're eating out that
No,
much,
that's not my
right?
point,
Like
though. My point is, like, let's say there's a skinny person and an obese person, and let's say they both get fast food once a week. When it comes to the obese person, you're going to attribute their obesity to eating fast food. But if you look
it's
at the
one
skinny
of the
person,
factors.
yeah, but I'm saying, like, let's just equalize everything. So it almost seems discriminatory because you wouldn't assume that the skinnier person is unhealthy due to eating the same exact thing as the obese person.
Like it's about the risk factor. Cause like
Well, eating fast food for an obese person might be considered a risk factor of becoming obese. But for the skinny person who does the exact same thing, would you not consider it a risk factor? Because they're making the same exact choices, right? But in the case of the obese person, you're saying it's your fault you're obese because you ate fast food once a week. The skinny person does the exact same thing and there's no consequence. Now you're saying that it's based on the choices that they make, but they made the exact same choice in that case. So isn't this basically just like fat discrimination almost? Because if it is based on choices, then they made the same choice. So why wouldn't the skinny person also have to pay more based on the same reasoning we used to make the obese person pay more?
well
Like, it just seems
like
like
obesity is a risk factor in itself, and that's just how insurance works.
yeah,
Is that
but
people with
we
those
agreed though. We agreed that some people's obesity can be based on genetic factors. Some of them can be based on a lack of access to healthy foods. So let's just say that we're equalizing everything and we're basing it down to choices. So if the choices are equalized for somebody who eats fast food once a week, you might say it's the obese person's fault for being obese for eating fast food, but you wouldn't say the exact same thing to the skinny person. That they're also making unhealthy choices. So isn't this basically just like
that
fat
obese
discrimination?
person is already like obese and has had like are you saying that obese person's only factor leading to their obesity is eating fast food?
No, I'm saying in the hypothetical, we're equalizing it such that that's the only thing that they do that's different from like the skinny person. So the skinny person and the obese person both, the only like factor that they do that would cause them to become obese, that would increase the likelihood, is eating fast food once a week. So basically if you're saying that obese people should pay more and you're trying to put some sort of like blame on them, you might look at the one unhealthy thing they do a week, like eating fast food. But for the skinny person who does the exact same thing, you wouldn't try to, say that they're wrong for doing that. You wouldn't try to make them pay more for the exact same action. So it seems kind of discriminatory to obese people. Potentially. So I just think that there's like if the exact same action can be used to make an obese person pay more and it can't be used to make a skinny person pay more, then I don't think we can say that it's a result of their choices necessarily. Hi? Oh, I can't hear neighbors. Oh, neighbors is muted, I think.
They posted in debate chat that they said they can't hear anyone.
Oh.
Are you able to talk, neighbors? Yeah, it must be a connection thing. Can you hear us, neighbors? Okay, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you if you're trying to speak.
Hi.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I think it's different with the obese person because they have a lot of higher risk factors. And if we're making these insurance companies pay a lot more, they could go into a lot of debt or even bankruptcy. And with like obesity, like there's risk factors like diabetes and like complicated pregnancy, just tons of like different stuff. And it would make sense that they pay higher because a lot of times they like require more for those conditions, right?
Wait, so are you changing it to they should pay more regardless of whether or not it's their fault? Like even an obese person who became obese as a result of genetic factors, for example, should have to pay more. Because there's two ways you can look at it. You can either look at it
I
like
would
it's
say
the obese person's fault, or it's irrelevant whose fault it is. So I'm just wondering which way you're going with
I
it.
think like I think I want to clarify and say like even if it isn't their fault.
Okay. So you're saying even if somebody is like genetically predisposed to becoming obese,
because of those risk factors, and with those risk factors come like more, care, right? If you'll get really sick.
Yeah, potentially.
Because I think I do want to clarify, because even if you are genetically obese, it's still kind of like something you have. Like there's like genetic. Like if someone's depression is genetic, it's still their responsibility to like take care of themselves.
Sure. But they have no way, like if they're genetically predisposed and they don't have like a realistic way to not be obese, do you think it's like the moral thing to do to make them pay more money as a result of like their health problem?
Like I think it's kind of like needed. Because like
I don't think it is. Like
it's a risk factor. That's how insurance works. And
well, insurance is a pool of people. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like I think it would be more ethical if we just all chipped in so that the burden on this one person isn't so great. Because you're taking a person who like is more likely to be poor, is less likely to be able to afford healthy foods, is having a health problem, and now you're just making them pay more money. Where it could be maybe a negligible cost if it was spread out amongst more people. Because it's kind of like the schooling thing that I was talking about, like giving an education to a kid might be extremely expensive, but if it's spread out amongst the larger population through taxes and public schooling, it becomes a feasible thing. So I feel like handling the additional costs that result from obesity, it would be more ethical if we handled it in that sort of way.
But it's pretty like unethical to make insurance companies like lose money because of risk factors.
I don't think it necessarily is. Like, do you think it's unethical that people have to pay taxes for public schools even if they don't have their own kids?
Like, I think that's different because there's not like companies going bankrupt because of that.
Well, personally, I think it would be more ethical to move to like a universalized healthcare system anyway. Like, I'm more concerned about the individual person who can't afford to pay higher insurance because of their health problem.
But that's not what this is about. This is about working within a system with insurance companies.
Well, I don't necessarily think that, because I don't think we have some sort of like moral duty to sustain private healthcare. Like, is that
it isn't about that. Like, this is about like. No, I'm just saying what the proposition is about and the conversation.
No, I understand what the proposition is about. And your argument against my stance is it might hurt insurance companies. And I'm saying that's not a big issue to me. Like, I think there's more important things in this situation.
But the conversation is about private healthcare, not universal healthcare.
No, I understand that we're arguing about this in the context that we're in a private healthcare system, but I'm saying I don't really care if it hurts insurance companies. Like, I don't care if insurance companies lose some money.
Those, like, it's not just some money. They could potentially, like, go bankrupt. And
I mean, do you have like evidence that the cost, if we don't make obese people pay more, that insurance companies will go bankrupt? Because I don't really think that's the case. Do you have like evidence for that claim?
I mean, I just think it's kind of like clear, right? They're like a business, and if we're making them pay a lot of money, do you have evidence of like most people, I mean, not most people, but a good amount of people's obesity being genetic?
I'm not saying that it is, though. I'm not making the claim that it's the case that their obesity is genetic. I'm saying that we don't know if it's genetic. We don't know all the factors that go into a person becoming obese. And I'm saying that we should err on the side of caution.
I just don't think it's like right. I just think.
Well, I think it can be multiple factors, right? Like choices can play into it, but genetic factors can be a big part of it too.
Of course, but
like I'm just saying, I think it would be better if the costs were spread out amongst the population so that it's more affordable than if it's all lumped on one person's
but those are people's taxes. Like there could be someone who can barely afford taxes as they have to pay them now. Well, I mean, not now because this is a crisis, so it's a special circumstance. Yeah. But like before the crisis, and like,
well, I think we could just get the money from people who can afford it. Like I think there's enough people.
How are we going to know who can afford it?
Based on income.
Well,
like there are people who can afford losing some money. Like I don't think Jeff Bezos is gonna not have enough food if we took a little bit of money so that the poor person who's obese, it doesn't go bankrupt.
But everyone has to pay taxes, and I'm pretty sure for public schools, everyone has to chip in.
Right, and I'm saying that it should be the same thing paying for healthcare costs for obese people.
But certain people may not be able to chip in any more than they already are now.
That's
if we're making everyone pay the taxes.
Yeah, I'm not saying that everybody needs to pay more. I'm saying that the people who can pay more should pay more. So the people who are obese, and it might not be their own fault, don't have to deal with this problem.
Not necessarily. I think we have like 5 minutes left, but
do we?
It's still like not. Like I just don't see why. Like when it's someone's risk factors, like school is different. School is like, you know, like just a well, healthcare is a service too. But what I'm saying is I don't see like why when someone's obese and they have their own risk factor, they're going to need more health care, you know, if they get one of these like diabetes. So
So what about like a special needs kid who needs more education? Like there's always going to be outliers where people need a little bit more help.
Like I don't know about that either.
But I mean, there's always going to be, you know, like outliers and stuff. And I'm saying that instead of like forcing like a special needs kid to like pay more to get education, or forcing an obese person to pay more just to like afford healthcare, we should, you know, if we spread it out,
those person's choices.
What?
Like it's due to those person's choices. I just don't think it's like right to not make them pay more because there are victims.
You're claiming it's due to their choices, but I'm saying that it could also be the result of genetic
but those could be outliers too. Like you could always worry about genetics or this or that, but there's just way more reasons for it to be someone's fault than not. And even if it is someone's
but we don't know though.
Like,
we don't know what percent of obese person it's their fault. And even if we were saying that it is their fault, like some percent, you wouldn't really be arguing at that point that obese people should be paying more. You'd be arguing that people who are obese as a result of poor choices, which is
I'm just
different than obese
saying,
person as a category.
yeah, but like I was
And
about
you're
to say,
kind of
even if it
changing it again,
isn't their
because
fault,
before
it's
when
a
you
risk factor.
when you were clarifying your position, you said that you were
Okay,
saying
I'm
that all
sorry.
obese
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Like I meant to like say.
You don't have to say you're sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm like nervous.
It's just, it seems like you're changing your position a little bit.
I'm not. Like I still do stand by making
Your clarification.
them pay more,
Okay.
even if it's not their fault. I mean, even if it, yeah.
Okay. Because it seemed okay. Yeah, so then that goes back to the special needs kid then. It's not the special needs kids that he's special needs, but it might still be more costly to give that kid an education. We're not going to lump that all on the parent, right?
Like I would,
like that would be unethical.
Huh? Like it's still that child's needs, and
it is,
like we can implement other stuff for.
But to be clear, are you saying that it's unethical that the cost of educating that kid is spread out? Like, do you think the entire cost should be lumped on the parent? In the same way that you're saying in this case that the
all
entire
of it,
cost
but I think they should pay more for the kid's education.
Okay, so you think that a parent who has a special needs kid, so they shouldn't be able to just send them to public school?
We have like 3 minutes left. Do you want to do closing statements when you're done?
Yeah. So I'm just saying, in the same way that we wouldn't make a special needs kid like pay more to get an education at a public school, I don't think we should make obese people pay more just to get health care when we can spread it out in a way that's manageable for everybody.
Well, I don't think it is manageable for everyone. I think that we already do these for other risk factors, so obesity should be included in that. And that it would just be like kind of like economically bad to not make them pay more, especially for certain companies who could go bankrupt or like
so
get largely in debt. I'm not done.
Okay, go ahead.
I think pain could be like for the people who are able to change their decisions, like for the people who are paying more could like incentivize them. I'm not saying that, like, I still do stand by that, like every obese person should have to pay more.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna do closing statement. Like, do we have
that
more
was
time?
my closing statement.
Oh, okay. So it's my turn. Okay. Yeah, so I just think it would be unethical to make obese people pay more. I think the cost would be more manageable if it was spread out amongst more people in the same way that we handle education. I don't think that my opponent showed the necessity of making obese people pay more. Like, I think it would be manageable if we did it my way, where it would be spread out over a larger population. And I just don't think it would be the right thing to do. And that's my closing statement.
Cool. Nice job, guys. Thanks for debating. For the audience listening who was here for at least 2/3 of that debate, I just put a voting poll in the debate chat. Please just base your vote off who you think performed better in the debate. And thanks for tuning in, of course. And thank you guys again for debating. Appreciate it, of course.